Hello and welcome back to the Q&A. So as always, if you've got a question or anything like that, then you can leave it down in the comments for this video. I'm still sort of chugging away in questions that were asked, maybe, a few weeks ago. But, what, the last, that particular Q&A, you guys left great questions. I mean, lots of really brilliant stuff. So if similarly awesome questions are asked, then I'll get to them eventually. Anyway, so the very first thing that we have today is about Vol'jin. So Mike Robbins asked if I think there's much of a problem with Blizzard not including Vol'jin in Warlords of Draenor. Now, I will be clear, Vol'jin is not there as a major kind of story player or anything like that, but he sort of is technically there in one little cinematic. And this isn't really a spoiler because there's no actual plot that goes on, but if you're a Horde player and you upgrade your garrison to level 3, then Vol'jin will pop in and be like, "Hey Mon, you did well," etc., and then he disappears again. That's basically all you see of Vol'jin. Now, you do see a few of his, what are they called, Shadow Hunter people? You do see a few of them, and in fact, I think they're the people who you communicate with for some of the level 100 quests, but really, he himself is not there. And the same goes for Varian Rin, the same goes for Anduin. I think there's a brief mention of Rathian somewhere, I'm not 100% sure on that one, but basically, you deal more with the Draenor characters. You're like Murad, Khadgar, Yril, Gunnar, Duratan, Thrall, etc. Well, okay, a bunch of them are not Draenor characters, but you know what I mean. You kind of deal with this little cast of characters, and not really the big old chaps from the sort of previous expansions. I think that's actually a really good thing, and I don't think there's any problem at all with Vol'jin just taking the back seat. You've got to remember that, first, from a logical perspective, he has got a lot of work to do. The Horde was kind of, nearly dismantled, and a lot of stuff going on, lots of problems at home to deal with, so really, it makes the most sense for him as a leader to just tend to the home front first, and just send people who he can trust through the Dark Portal to deal with the, well, whatever's going to happen in the content patches of this expansion. Now, there is also another benefit from this. A lot of the characters like Varian Rin and etc., they're just so big, and they've got so much pre-existing lore and all that, that it's kind of hard to really link with them as a player or really, feel like you're a part of all that, and generally it does feel a lot more like they're ordering you around and you're kind of their bitch, which I suppose does make sense. Generally, you are the, the king kind of orders you about. But one of the things that's really done a lot of good, work, whatever, in Warlords is the fact that we're with a bunch of, I don't want to say smaller characters because they're still really important, but we're with some new characters in terms of them actually having good in-game representations, and some flat-out new characters. And the great thing about that is we get to see all their character development from scratch. We get to have those characters kind of grow with us through the leveling experience, and in terms of storytelling, that's far more powerful than just Jaina and Lorthamar popping up in the Isle of Thunder and being like, "Oh, hey, players, we have things for you to do." And, yeah, I just think that overall it's led to far more effective storytelling. So it's nice that all these people like Vol'jin and Varian are just sitting back and, ruling and then sending us off to do things. That's generally the kind of thing that big leader characters do. And a part of me does not really look forward to going back to Azeroth and then having to deal with this familiar cast of characters again. I like the fact that the new people feel more fresh because they've just been developed so well using this kind of new framework of character building, whatever, the Blizzard have really sort of popped out in Warlords. So yeah, really the answer to your question is that I am completely happy with Vol'jin and his buddies not really being a part of the expansion. Okay, so next we've got a pretty pertinent question. It's from Ozan Young, who said, "So in Vanilla, TBC, and Wrath of the Lich King, we saw a plethora of winged dungeons. So things like SM, Coilfang, Reservoir, Tempest Keep, the Nexus, Icecrown Citadel, etc. And this provided us with a huge a munch is not a word, a huge number of dungeons." How the hell did I get a munch from that? Ugh. Anyway, he also said that since Cataclysm, Blizzard have basically all but scrapped this idea of creating content, which has severely reduced the number of dungeons with each expansion. And he asked, ultimately, why do I feel Blizzard has went down this route of dungeon design / raid design? And I think that's a good question. This is something I have talked about before, but it's going, I don't know, it's actually just thinking about why Blizzard decided to do this and some of the impacts that it has. It's, I don't know, interesting sort of thing to talk about. So first of all, I'm just going to cover things from a player perspective because that is the main, that's the avenue which I have obviously approached the game from. So it's nice having all the cool artwork and, really ultra high quality stuff that we're getting currently in the new dungeons. I can say that the Warlords dungeons are brilliant, but they're, art wears off, right? Auchindoun's really impressive your first time through, maybe even your third time through, but on your fifth or sixth time through, guess what? It's no longer that impressive. And at that stage, if you just take the sort of state of a player after they've done every dungeon a few times, what would they prefer? To trudge through these, this small number of pretty dungeons more times, bearing in mind that the prettiness is kind of worn off, or trudge through double the amount of dungeons with different trash, different encounters, different mechanics to deal with. I think that would be better. Honestly, having different gameplay that's actually more varied is obviously something you can do if you have more dungeons, and that's a lot more sustainable than just relying on having a smaller amount of really impressive art. In terms of why Blizzard have decided to do it, I just think that they thought they could do better with dungeons and maybe up the quality or something like that, but they found that they weren't able to make as many dungeons, maybe? I know that certainly back in the Burning Crusade, because of the way the gearing was done in the game back then, dungeons were kind of super important. You did all your heroics, you had all your attunements, and there was a lot more tail in that system, so dungeon content, I think, was something that lasted for a far larger proportion of the expansion. Moving into Wrath of the Lich King, well, Blizzard didn't really know what to do. They had made Naxxramas, they were still thinking about things. Obviously they would then experiment with heroic modes and raiding with ICC and how the difficulty levels worked, and there was still a lot of them finding their feet with things. So I'd say that originally they made dungeons just coming off the Burning Crusade, where dungeons lasted for such a large amount of time, so they thought, hey, we better put a lot of resources into dungeons. And of course back then they had all these big things like, I don't know, the Vargul, oh my god, I've forgotten their name. They're like one of my favorite races in the game, the Viking dudes. You've, their place, Ulduar, Icecrown, you've got all these places which are really big, so they just thought to themselves, hey, we'll do multiple dungeons. And because in, the Burning Crusade, people did dungeons for so long because of the way raid gearing was done, well, in that case, this is going to be a lot of content that's going to last for a lot of time. But then, over time, the way that we geared up our characters changed. We had dailies that gave us epics, we had just various things that would gear us up quite a bit faster, and then I think it got to the stage in Cataclysm where Blizzard realized that they'd really, with LFD and the way they'd been handling gearing, they were kind of forcing people into doing a lot of dungeons to gear their characters up quickly, and in general, people's characters were gearing up a lot more quickly anyway, far quicker than it was back in the days of TBC. So moving into MOP, they realized that, hey, the overall kind of percentage of an expansion in which dungeons are relevant to people is maybe smaller. Therefore, it doesn't make as much sense to allocate so many resources to it. I suppose you could say that, but then again, of course, it was generally less dungeons, but they looked maybe less pretty. I've seen that argument go. But really, I think that the visual upgrade is not as much to do with the quantity of dungeons, it's more just to do with the fact that Blizzard are getting better at art in general. The zones look amazing, all the stuff looks far better than it did in the past. So really, I think this is just about numbers and quantities and things like that. So yeah, I'd say that really they've realized that over time, dungeons have been having a less important role in the game, especially with the MOP dungeons that were so Super Zerg mode, or even the Cataclysm dungeons, which post-nerfs were Super Zerg mode. And because of that, Blizzard just realized, hey, maybe we don't need to allocate as much resources to dungeons because people are just going to Timeless Isle gear themselves up, or, people are just going to gear up really quickly via some of the other means that we have, and that means that dungeons are less important. Talking about Warlords of Draenor in specific, well, you're able to get dungeon quality gear by crafting things. You're able to get it from Apexis crystals. You're able to get it from dungeons. You're able to get similarly good gear from things like Ashran and Strongboxes. You're able to, I've already mentioned crafting it. You can get, I think, some dungeon quality stuff from doing follower missions as well. Do you get my drift? There's a lot of stuff there. Whereas previously it was far more just everything was dungeons. Therefore it makes sense to have loads of dungeons. Whereas now there's a bit more variation, so they just don't think they need as many dungeons. Perhaps. Maybe. This has been a bit of a rambly point, hasn't it? Ultimately, though, I still would like more dungeons. I would like dungeons to last longer as well. And I think we might see a return of that. And the main reason why is because dungeons are different in Warlords of Draenor, and this is just assuming that they don't do a Cataclysm-style nerf. I'll probably talk about it in a video at some point, but because of the way challenge modes are done, and, the differences between challenge modes in Warlords and Pandaria in terms of them giving decent gear, And because of that, and the just in general increase in difficulty, especially with the heroics, I just think that dungeons are going to be more important. Maybe there'll be something that at least difficulty-wise will be relevant to people for longer, so moving into the next expansion, if they decide that they're going to keep a similar level of difficulty, then it would make sense to create more dungeons. Certainly, I'd say that from a personal view, I really would prefer the Wrath of the Lich King model. I think it was way cooler, you know, for, say, Ulduar, right? Instead of just having the one Ulduar dungeon, no, have 3, because it makes Ulduar feel even more expansive, and as a player, I don't mind seeing this, like, similar artwork. I'm just happy that I get 3 sets of unique encounters. I thought that was really good, so yeah, there's my opinion on that. Next, we've got a question from Davixa, who asked if I think it would be possible for them to implement a MOBA-style battleground in World of Warcraft, and that's actually a really good question. So right out of the bat, I'll just answer the question and say, yes, I do think it's possible, but I've got a feeling you wanted a bit more than just me saying yes. So, MOBAs are very different to World of Warcraft in terms of combat and just various things, so a lot of work would need to be done to actually make something like that work. I don't believe that they could just take, say, Summoner's Rift, and just put it into World of Warcraft, and then expect it to work, you know, so they'd have towers, they'd have waves of minions, but we'd just be running around on our characters, fighting with our WoW, you know, style of abilities. I just don't think stuff like that would work. Of course, I don't think a 5v5 would work as well for World of Warcraft either, just because of the way the classes are balanced, and, you know, the meta is very much a sort of fixed-ish thing in those games, and just the class design and all that stuff means that 5v5 wouldn't really work. You couldn't just have, I don't know, 1 in mid, 2 in top, 1 in bottom, then a jungler, or whatever the current meta is. That just wouldn't work as well in World of Warcraft, plus class balance would start to be a massive issue, so it would need to be a bit larger than just a 5v5. And overall, just dealing with, say, you know, players coordinating with each other and things like that could be problematic. I could see it being an absolute pain in the ass in just a regular PUG. I'd say that a rated Battleground version could be pretty cool, though. Yeah, now they did try to put this into the game at one point. There was a test map thingy called Defense of the Alehouse, which never actually made it into the game. They were planning on doing it, though, just, for some reason it didn't make it in. Maybe they weren't just finding the fun, or maybe they just ran out of time. I think both are equally likely, honestly, because there would need to be just so much in terms of design work done to make it feel right with World of Warcraft combat that it would be an intensive enough thing to create. But fundamentally, I think there's probably a way of making it work. There generally is a way of making just about anything work. You just have to have a lot of creativity and maybe approach it in a rather unorthodox manner. And I think the key here would be an unorthodox manner. They would have to do a twist on things. It would maybe have to be a different map. Buffs would have to be handled differently. There would need to be some way to just account for the fact that class design varies so much from the two different genres. So there's a lot of work there, but yeah, it would be pretty cool if it could happen, and I would love to see it in the game. Anyway, that's basically it for today's round of questions. If you've got your own, you can leave it down in the comments. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.